The father, full of remorse, hides in his room and cries. Soon after, the private detectives finally bring good news. They have investigated and found Lananai's appearance in another city. At this time, the father also learned from a classmate that she had seen Lananai selling sushi in an underground passage. But coincidentally, Lananai did not go that day, because Lananai had fallen ill after working too hard for a long time. But in order to make a living, she dragged her tired body to work at the seafood market. Unfortunately, her parents had no choice but to sit there and wait for their daughter to appear. Sure enough, under the persistence of the two, they finally waited for their daughter. But at this time, Lananai did not choose to forgive her parents, and directly packed up her stall and planned to leave. Her parents hurriedly went up to hold Lananai back. As a result, in the tug-of-war between the two sides, the wrapped sushi accidentally scattered on the ground. Lananai, who was mentally and physically exhausted, finally exploded at this moment. Watching her elderly mother shove the sushi on the floor into her mouth with huge mouthfuls was too much for Lananai, who couldn't bear to watch. She grabbed the bag and walked straight out. Her parents saw this and hurriedly chased after her, and persuaded their daughter to go home with them. Her mother then told her that Jiho was looking for her all over the world. This made Lananai feel even more ashamed, thinking about how she had hurt Jiho so cruelly in order to marry a swindler. Lananai accused her parents of not telling her this, and hoped to preserve what little self-respect she had left. After saying this, Lananai quickly turned around and fled. Jiho, who had been unable to find Lananai for a long time, was also very upset. In the evening, he deliberately came to the house to find Lananai's father for a drink. However, the family at this time kept the news of finding their daughter from him. His mother even said that she had been looking for her recently and was tired. She also advised Jiho not to look for her anymore. Seeing such an irresponsible family, Jiho was also disheartened and chose to leave. The father, who was worried that Lananai was suffering, could only hide in a corner every day and watch. At this time, Lananai happened to meet an aunt who wanted to return a purchase, but when she opened the bag, she found that the fish had already been eaten half by her. Lananai definitely would not agree to a refund when she saw this, but unexpectedly, this aunt directly came up and grabbed Lananai's hair. The father, who was hiding in the corner, saw this and hurriedly stepped forward to stop. Unexpectedly, the two women fought more and more fiercely. In desperation, the father had no choice but to take out his phone and call the police, which finally resolved the war between the two women. Afterwards, the father quickly crouched down to help his daughter up, but Lananai was not in the least grateful, claiming that she was already a person abandoned by her parents, and that even if she died in the future, she absolutely did not want them to bother. The father also felt a great deal of self-blame about this, so when he got home, he told his mother what had happened to Lananai. The next day, his mother came to the door with dinner waiting for Lananai to get off work. She wanted to improve the food for her daughter and grandson, but Lananai just knocked the food onto the floor. Looking at her mother's guilty expression, Lananai felt a little bit of sympathy, but in the end she ruthlessly told her mother to leave. The reason she ran away from home was to prove to them, even though she had been divorced twice, she could still support herself and her son. When father saw mother come back in a daze, he hurriedly went up to comfort her, and advised her to put aside her daughter's affairs for the time being. Why not go to the living room and watch TV to ease your mood? Unexpectedly, Jiho suddenly paid a visit at this time. After entering the door, he found that his father-in-law's family was sitting in front of the TV, relaxed and watching entertainment programs. Jiho was furious and directly turned off the TV, and then angrily rebuked the whole family for being outrageous. Lananai is dead or alive? They don't know. As parents, how can they still have the mood to watch TV here? After Jiho finished speaking, he angrily got up and left the room. When he saw his son-in-law was angry, Lananai's father hurriedly chased after him, and finally told him the truth. After learning the news, Jiho immediately drove to the market to look for Lananai. When he arrived at the market, he happened to see Lananai hurrying to make a delivery with a fishbowl on her head. When Lananai saw Jiho, she panicked and knocked over the fishbowl on her head. Just as she was crouching on the ground preparing to pick up the fish, Jiho didn't hesitate and walked up to her, holding her in his arms, begging Lananai to stay by his side forever. But at this moment, Lananai had no face to face Jiho, so she pushed Jiho away, and told him that she was no longer qualified to talk about love. Lananai did not wait for Jiho to react, and disappeared into the crowd again with the fishbowl on her head. However, the next day, Jiho came to find Lananai again, hoping that she would completely let go of the past and go back with him to start a new life. However, Lananai was still bitter about the previous marriage. No matter how Jiho persuaded her, she was determined to live on her own. Although Lananai worked hard every day to support the family, it was still hard on her obedient son, who was dependent on her. Soon after, her father could no longer bear to see this. He quietly went to the school to visit his grandson. He also took Tom out for a meal of braised pork. However, this was the first time the child had eaten meat since leaving home. In the past, He had always eaten the leftover seaweed rolls his mother sold at home. Grandpa felt very sad as he touched his grandson's thin body. Then he followed Tom to his daughter's place. He looked around at the simple environment in the room, then leaned down to feel the cold floor. He opened the door and discovered that his daughter was still using briquettes for heating. He really couldn't bear to let his grandson live in such an environment. In the end, the father decided to take Tom back home first. Lon and I, realizing that her child had been taken back to her parents' home, came angrily to forcibly take Tom back. No matter how Tom cried and screamed, it was useless. At this time, Lon and I no longer wanted to listen to her parents' persuasion, and resolutely took her son back home. This gradually made Tom hate his mother. Every day, he would think of various reasons to oppose her. He also learned to pretend to be sick and not go to school. Under this situation, Lon and I had no choice but to take Tom to the market with her to work. However, she does not know the real reason why her son does not want to go to school is because his classmates all dislike the unpleasant fishy smell that comes from Tom's body. After Jiho was repeatedly rejected by Lon and I, he shifted his target to Tom and made up for his previous wrongdoings towards Tom. So Jiho first took Tom to the supermarket to buy a bunch of snacks, and then followed Tom to the rental house. Meanwhile, Lon and I, who could not find her son, hurried home anxiously. When she entered the house, she found Jiho eating tteokbokki with her son. In a rage, Lon and I called Jiho out of the room and warned him not to disturb her life again. Unexpectedly, Jiho shamelessly pestered Lon and I in Tom's name, and even in order to successfully win back Lon and I's heart, he asked his two daughters to cooperate with him and take the initiative to ask Tom out for a walk. Lon and I, who was worried about her children, had no choice but to go out with them. This finally eased the tension between the two. After returning home, Gianna encouraged her father to quickly bring his new wife home to live with them. It had to be said that Gianna had really grown up after this experience. Meanwhile, Tom was also doing his homework on his mother. He kept saying that he hoped Jiho would be his father. Lon and I was thoughtful after hearing this, and her heart became very complicated. The next morning, Jiho mustered up his courage and went to Lon and I's parents' house, and declared in front of the whole family his determination to remarry Lon and I. Faced with Jiho's sincere attitude, Lon and I's parents were also very happy. Although they still didn't know that Jiho had already moved back into the villa, they finally accepted him as their poor son-in-law. That evening, Jiho shamelessly showed up at Lon and I's house again. He lied that it was a very special day, so he took Lon and I to a Western restaurant to improve their diet. In order to make the other person happy, Jiho secretly kept teasing Lon and I with his feet while they were eating, while pretending to be very serious on the surface. After returning home, Jiho again lied that he did not drive, and begged Lon and I to let him stay at her place for the night. After chatting with each other for a while, Lon and I, who had been tired after a long day, fell asleep quickly. Unexpectedly, Jiho took advantage of Lon and I falling asleep to finish all her remaining work, and left a very touching note before leaving. "Today is the day we first met. At the time, I didn't know I would fall so deeply in love with you. We are people who met again after twists and turns. It's fine if you can't accept me right away, but remember to finish eating before working." Lon and I was very moved after reading it, and Jiho's sincere attitude made her waver. Jiho took Tom with him almost every day to improve his diet, and the two became closer and closer. Tom also directly called Jiho Dad. This strengthened